Hi there, everyone. My name is Max Young, and I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of Vroman's Bookstore to tonight's virtual event. Tonight, we are lucky to have with us Terry Virts, who will be in conversation with Sylvain Neuvel, presenting Terry's book, How to Astronaut. We're so grateful that you could all make it tonight and that our bookstore is able to continue bringing authors and their works to our community during this time. This evening's event includes a short Q&A portion, so if you'd like to ask Terry a question at any point, you can go ahead and click the Ask a Question button, which is going to be over here, and they'll go ahead and get to that towards the end of the event. If you'd like to purchase Terry's book and support our bookstore as well as Terry, you can go ahead and click this green button right down there, and it'll take you to our website where you can purchase his book. But with that all said, let me go ahead and introduce our guests tonight. First off, we have Colonel Terry Virts, who served as a U.S. Air Force test fighter pilot, is a NASA veteran of 2 space flights, and a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy, Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and Harvard Business School. He is a celebrated leader, speaker, and author whose 7 months in space included piloting a space shuttle, commanding the International Space Station, 3 spacewalks, and performing scientific experiments while working closely with multiple international partners. And with him, Sylvain Neuvel is a science fiction author whose works include Sleeping Giants, Waking Gods, The Test, and Only Human. He is also currently Director of Translation Services and a software engineer for a Montreal company, a certified translator, and an astronaut. I'm just kidding, he's not an astronaut. That's only Terry. But with that all out of the way, I will go ahead and let them take over. Thank you all so much.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. I see there's already some people saying hello in the chat. You should, I'll say hi and maybe add where you're watching us from. I just want to see where people are from tonight.
Right.
We're technically in the Los Angeles area in Pasadena.
I wish.
Yeah.
This would have been fun to do in person.
Absolutely. I was very excited for this. First of all, let me just say I absolutely loved your book. It was everything I expected, but it was also way more than that. So much of it I didn't even see coming. I thought it would be informative, which it was. I thought it might be entertaining. It was super fun to read, but it was also touching at times and sad, and it made me think, and it made me wonder about a bunch of things. I never thought a book about how to astronaut would make me think about. Plus you can really write. I'm impressed.
Thank you so much. That means a lot coming from you, Sylvain. Really, thank you.
So for those of us who haven't read the book, which, by the way, I invite you to buy from Vroman's tonight if you can, and if it's not practical,
there you go, the green link right there.
because of where you live, buy it from your local independent bookstore, please. They need the help right now. So without further ado, why don't I let you introduce the book? I think you even prepared a little presentation for us.
I did. So at my house, I have your books on my desk, and I have my book, and I can show it. But I'm in Colorado right now. Actually, I decided to just get away for a few days, and I'm writing for my next book. So I'm on a little retreat. I've got a brown bear looking over my shoulder here at this condo in the mountains of Colorado, which is pretty cool. But, you know, when I wrote this book, How to Astronaut, my goal was to bring spaceflight to people and not to make an astronaut memoir. There's enough of those. I definitely did not want to do that. I did not want to make a technical book for the space nerds of the world. There's a lot of that stuff out there. I wanted to bring something that would be accessible to, you know, normal people. So it's for men and for women. It's for young and for old. Hopefully you don't have to be, you know, an NASA expert to enjoy it. And I wanted to make something that would be, that would have 2 reactions, to make people laugh and to say, wow. And I'm glad one of the things you touched on, I think 80% of the book is fun and cool and space. But there's a few chapters that are sad and maddening and angering, you know, because it's about people, and not everything is perfect and happy. And sometimes astronauts tend to be very, you know, plastic and happy, and they're always smiling. And a lot of space flight is really cool, and some of it really makes you mad. And there's a chapter about Columbia, the Columbia accident. So it's about all the different aspects. A friend of mine, we flew F-16 together, and now he helps with his family's bookstore. We were doing this a couple nights ago in Alabama, and he asked me, Terry, do you wish you had this book before you flew in space? And I was like, that is the perfect introduction for How to Astronaut. I wish I had this book before I flew in space, because hopefully it covers a lot of the stuff that you need to know before you go into space. So I do have a little PowerPoint keynote I'm going to try and share. If we can get this, we just did this a few minutes ago. We pre-flighted the jet. And let me know, Sylvain, can you see this now?
Yes. Wow.
That's good.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So this is the book. And so I wrote 51 short essays. I didn't write, big, thick, dense chapters that take a long time to get through. It's something you can read by the pool or by the beach or on the nightstand, before you go to bed. Hopefully each chapter is just a few minutes. It's 3, 5, 6 pages. It's not a long chapter. You can read them in any order, and they're just different aspects of spaceflight. Some of them are things that you would expect, like, how to launch in a space shuttle and how to fly a jet and how to train to be a medical doctor and how to do rendezvous. And then there's a few things that you wouldn't expect, what to do with a dead body if your crewmate dies, or are there aliens, or there's other, we talk through the chapters. So these are just a few examples of the different chapters. There's actually a few chapters about launch. And of course, I could go on, and I could write chapters in a book, which I did about launch, the sensations of what it feels like, the G-forces and the vibration. Mentally, as a pilot, my focus was not screwing up. So all my buddies would see me make a mistake and give me a nickname. That was my main fear, which is probably not very rational. I should have been worried about blowing up, but I was, that was my worry, was making a mistake in front of the world while they were watching. How to get in the spacesuit, which is not an easy thing. In these Hollywood movies, the astronauts just jump in their spacesuit and they're off. But unfortunately, that's not the way it works in real life. So there's a lot of talk of that. There's an interesting chapter on the red button. This is probably falls into the unexpected category, but you have to read about that, find out about what that is. Spacewalking, there's a whole section on that. There's a few chapters on spacewalking. Again, how to get in that bulky astronaut suit is not easy. It takes hours, and that thing weighs a few hundred pounds on Earth. It's basically a mini spaceship, self-contained. In this picture, you can see the little black dots. They're actually little small rocket jets that can fly you around. Dealing with all of that equipment, getting yourself oriented. 99.9% of my time outside was work, but every once in a while I could stop and take a look. And in this picture, you see that sunrise on the distance. It's like the most beautiful thing you can imagine. You can't imagine it actually until you see it. It's like seeing creation from God's perspective, and then you have to get back to work and start working on those cables and putting grease on the bolts. So spacewalking was an amazing thing. I thought I had done a lot as a fighter pilot and as a test pilot, as a shuttle pilot, and there's definitely nothing that I've done is like spacewalking. One of the unexpected things for me was getting to film an IMAX movie called A Beautiful Planet. Several of my crewmates helped make this movie, and it was the highlight of my time in space. It was probably the most important thing I did while I was in space, because so many millions of people are going to get to see it. Actually, Disney just put it on Hulu, so they're streaming, I think, 16 different IMAX films. Tony Myers was our director, and she was really my inspiration and my mentor for directing. I've got a film coming out in a couple of days called One More Orbit that I directed, and Tony, it's dedicated to Tony. You'll see at the end of the film, there's a little dedication to her. So she was amazing, and just getting to take the images of the Earth and also shoot the video of the crew inside was a highlight of my time in space. So there's a chapter in the book about how to make a movie in space, which was a lot of fun. I got to be the crew medical officer, which is pretty cool. In fact, I got to spend a week downtown Houston at the Houston medical system, working in the emergency room, working in an operating room. I mean, I just fell in love with medicine. I actually went to local bookstore and got I got one of those MCAT study guides for the test you have to take to get into medical school. I flipped through it for about 5 minutes and then put it back on the shelf and realized that I would not be going to medical school after my astronaut career. But it was fun, to play one on TV. And there's some funny stories in there. Making some poor NASA engineers that volunteered to let us take their blood. They thought I was a doctor, and when I told them I was a pilot, they almost passed out. Survival training was something that, you wouldn't expect to be part of an astronaut's career, but I did it in the U.S. Air Force. I did it with the U.S. Navy. I did it with the French Air Force when I was on exchange there. I did it with the Russian space program, winter survival and water survival. These are what these pictures are. And I did it with an organization called Knowles in Alaska. So that chapter was originally huge. It was about twice as long as the one that we put in the book because it was just too long. But it was really cool. It was, good, bad, and ugly in the survival universe. But there's a lot of stories from survival training. Flying jets is something that you have to do as part of an astronaut. And the astronaut pilots fly in the front seat of our T-38s. And then a lot of the astronauts they're not pilots, but they still have to fly. So we have 2-seat T-38s. They're supersonic Air Force jet trainers. And that experience is by far the best training. We call it space flight readiness training. And it is by far the best preparation for being an astronaut. Because when you do simulators, they're simulators. You can hit the pause button, get out, and go to lunch. But you can't do that in an airplane. Like, if you don't make it safely to the runway, you either crash and die or you eject and destroy the airplane. So, there's real world consequences to your actions and decisions. And flying those jets is really the best training that we do. Seeing the Earth is spectacular. My first book was a National Geographic photography book about space, and I talk about it in How to Astronaut, just getting to know the Earth by colors. Here's Canada. Canada and Russia are white for snow and ice. The Bahamas and Caribbean are just this gorgeous blue, turquoise, aqua color. Central Africa is really dark, almost black. You can see the jungle down there. On the left is a picture of the Australian outback, which is red. I tell a story how the station turned red one day. I looked out the window and it was Australia down below, and the light had actually lit up the space station. And here's an image of the Southern Lights. You can see a satellite going through in the distance. But this is the Southern Lights, Aurora Australis, and they're just spectacular. I mean, it's almost alien. They're so beautiful. In the unexpected chapter category, I would put cutting Samantha's hair. She's Italian, and Samantha and Anton and I all flew on the Russian Soyuz together. And before she allowed me to go into space, I had to go with her to her hairdresser and learn how to cut women's hair, which was definitely an experience. It was something when I signed up to be an Air Force F-16 pilot, I never thought I'd have to do that, but I did. So anyway, so those are some examples. Those are, I think, 9 of the 51 chapters, but it gives you a flavor for the, the expected and unexpected and so on. So I'm going to try and close this. Are we back to normal now?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. So that's a teaser of the book.
It's a good teaser. You mentioned it in there, but you were a fighter pilot. You were an astronaut. You did spacewalks. You did a million things that would make everyone else just die of a heart attack or pee their pants repeatedly. Is writing a book something different? Is it more stressful? Is it a walk in the park? Is it a totally different thing for you?
Well, I tell you, for me, writing a book was definitely not on my agenda. I'm sure in high school, if they had a category, I would have been the least likely to write a book. I was not a good English student. I got C's in English. My poor English teachers were tortured by me. And because I thought all that mattered was the science and the math. And then as I got older, I realized that if you can't communicate, it doesn't matter what you know if you can't communicate it. And in the Air Force, you were always writing performance reports, and I was writing constantly. And I remember I just got to this point where writing was like the most important thing I did. In high school, I learned how to type on a keyboard, and Coach Clock, the high school football coach, he taught shop and typing. And most American high schools have a football coach that teaches shop and typing. And that's probably the most useful thing I've ever learned in my life, because I type so much. Like if I was hunting and pecking, I would have just wasted months and years of my life doing that. So I've switched from this, fighter pilot astronaut into the artistic, writing, and I want to do TV and film. It's a different side of the brain, but I think they're both important. And I think the way you impact people is through art, is through writing and TV and film. Those are the ways that you tell stories that impact people, much more so than the other technical things, I think.
It's not your first book. You mentioned one of the other ones, and I think it's not your last one either. Can you talk about what came before and what's coming next?
Well, the first book I wrote was View from Above. It was a National Geographic photography book, and I love that book. It's my first one. It's that, your first is always your proudest or whatever. And then the second one was a really small project. We did a very small reproduction of the Apollo 11 flight plan. And it's this really high-end, beautiful Italian leather, 23 karat gold reproduction. The company that does all the head of state gifts for the president, their office is right next to the White House, did this. And it's spectacular. It's kind of mind-blowing. And I wrote an introduction for it, but it's mostly just a reproduction of the Apollo flight plan. And then number 3 was How to Astronaut. So this is by far, I think, my biggest. I think the most number of people will read this one of all the other ones I've done. And I've got a kid's book in work. I'm working with the publisher on that, so it hasn't been released yet. But I'm really excited for that, because that's how I got motivated to be an astronaut. I read a book as a kid, and reading is so important for kids. The kids are always asking me, "How do I be an astronaut?" And it doesn't matter what you want to be. If you want to be an astronaut or a doctor or a writer or start a business or whatever you want to do, you need to read. Like, reading is so important, especially for kids, and especially today, because the video games have kind of overtaken everything, and reading is a discipline that uses certain neurons in your brain. I'm not a neurosurgeon, but I think if I was, there's a certain way that your brain is going to get wired if you read, that's really good, that makes you thoughtful and intelligent, and you can discern facts from fiction. And that's so important today. My daughter's college class, they have a class on that, on how to tell what's real news and what's fake news. Mm-hmm. There's so much noise. There's been so much noise, and all people of all ages are bombarded so much. And I think most people are not equipped to tell what's real and what's just a conspiracy theory and what's lies. And I think reading gives you that. It helps wire your brain in a way to help you function in society. And we are in desperate need of people who can function and be good citizens. I think in the future, that's going to be even more. I think you could write some dystopian science fiction novels about, 1984 kind of novels, because it seems like we're moving in that direction, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a little scary, but things tend to, go up and down. So hopefully we're at the very bottom of whatever hole we're digging ourselves in.
Right. Let's hope we're at the bottom and things are looking up. By the way, I love your shirt. You want to show folks that?
Yeah. For those,
Valentina Tereshkova.
First woman in space, 1963.
Yeah.
I think the only woman to do a solo flight, right?
I think you're right, actually. Yeah, she flew just like Yuri Gagarin went up by himself, and those early Voskhod capsules were solo. That's a good point. I didn't realize that. I've been to her museum. Her hometown, I think, is Nizhny Novgorod. It's on the Zolotoy Koltso, and it's a couple hours from Moscow. I've been to her museum. It's pretty cool.
She wasn't military. She worked in a factory, I think. They picked her because she was tiny and a skydiver.
Right, that's right.
They were looking for skydivers. I don't know why, but
even today, the Russians, when you're a Russian cosmonaut, they throw you out of an airplane and they give you this like homework, and you have to do math problems while you're in free fall. And they just want to make sure that you can think while you're in, in danger. So that skydiving is really important for them. It was for Yuri Gagarin, and it still is today.
Oh, interesting. Because when I read her short biography, I was surprised because it was like the main factor that helped her get selected.
Right.
I come from a world of fiction. We make stuff up. Are there any works of fiction or science fiction that inspired you either to become an astronaut or that just inspired you, period?
So as a kid, I read a lot, and Arthur Clarke was probably my favorite. I also read Isaac Asimov, Foundation and Empire, the trilogy. Jose Farmer, the River trilogy. Was it the Riverboat trilogy? Was a really cool book. I don't know if you ever read that, but it's this 1,000,000-mile long river, and they learn that if you die, you wake up in another era. And so they try and travel along the river, because the river is like 1,000,000 years BC in the future. So as you travel down the river, you go to different times. And so it's a way to travel through time. That was really cool. But Arthur Clarke was my favorite. 2001, Rendezvous with Rama was probably my favorite book that he wrote. These guys were really, really were science fiction. They knew their science.
Yeah.
They kind of put them a few centuries out in the future. The Right Stuff is maybe the best book ever about space. It's not fiction at all. It's about Tom Wolfe's history of the early space program and Chuck Yeager going supersonic and the early Mercury astronauts. It's really, really, really good. It's amazing how many of those stories still apply to, at least they did for me when I was in NASA a few years ago. There's a lot of good space books.
And somehow Star Trek sort of made its way into your life in strange ways. I was reading, I was waiting for your book to arrive because they said we're sending you a book. I said, cool, free book. But then I had to wait. So I went to Wikipedia, and Wikipedia is funny because the articles tell you almost as much about the person who wrote them than about the person they're writing about. And
right.
the section on Wikipedia on your NASA career has 3 dates in it, 2 of which you'd expect. There's February 8, 2010. You can tell us what happened on that day.
Yeah, that was my first launch on STS-130.
Best day ever, or, well, professionally?
Yeah. You got those personal dates are important too.
Yeah.
I mean, I left Earth for the first time on a space shuttle. That's hard to beat that one.
Yeah. The second
having a
one
book come out is pretty cool. These getting to sign a book deal, or having your book come out, or having a movie come out this week. Those are also pretty cool. I gotta say.
That's pretty neat. The second date is November 23rd, 2014. You flew again on that day.
On a Soyuz, yeah. Left Baikonur Aerodrome in Kazakhstan on that day.
And the third date on your Wikipedia NASA career description is February 28, 2015. Do you remember what you did on that day?
That was the day that Leonard Nimoy passed away, and I did a tribute to him. So the only reason, I remember that day because we did 3 spacewalks in a week, and the third, it was super busy, busiest I've ever been. And I was leading the third one, and the third was very different than the first 2. There was a lot of studying, a lot of equipment preparation. It takes like hours and days to get all your gear ready to do a spacewalk. And then NASA Public Affairs emailed me and said, "Hey, Terry, Leonard Nimoy died. Mr. Spock passed away. Can you do something?" And I don't have any time. I'm doing a spacewalk tomorrow. So I went down to the cupola. I tried to think something. So I did the Vulcan Salute. And it took a while to get my hand in focus and Earth in focus and my hand exposed and Earth exposed. And anyway, and I just tweeted it. No words, no nothing. It was I just wanted to do a tribute to Spock because he's so beloved. He was such an important part of our culture in the 20th century. And it got so much attention. I'm sure some of your followers right now saw this. picture, and no one has any idea it was me. It wasn't me at all. It wasn't about me at all. It was about Spock and Leonard Nimoy and Star Trek and what he meant. Because Star Trek, any great science fiction has cool aliens and lasers, and there's really cool way to, kill people, and there's spaceships and there's all this stuff. But that's not what science fiction is about. There's always a deeper societal thing that's going on, right? In my One More Orbit movie, it was about this adventure of setting a world record, but it was really about how people can get along and work together in this crazy world exploration brings people together. So Star Trek in the 60s, there was racism, and there was Vietnam, and there was the Soviet Union, and there were all these really big issues. And Star Trek dealt with all of them. But I think when you have, funny looking aliens or guys, Captain Kirk with lasers, and you can deal with really hard topics that if you tried to just talk about them, everybody would get mad, but you can deal with it. Well, it's science fiction. There's a spaceship. It's not real. And so Spock helped us get through some of the worst moments in American history just by being the calm, rational guy. So that was my tribute to Leonard Nimoy.
They repaid you well. You were on Enterprise, weren't you?
And then years later, I was an astronaut, and I was my buddy Mike Fink had flown in space, and I was his support astronaut. I was the guy on the ground helping him out while he was in space. So when he landed, I flew him out to LA, and we were doing some NASA talks at Boeing. NASA is always sending us out to contractors just to talk to the workers and say thank you for keeping us alive. And he had gotten to be friends with Scott Bakula. He talked to Scott Bakula while he was in space. He was the captain of the Enterprise, and it was the last episode ever. Like, they were ending Star Trek, and it was done until STD came out, Star Trek Discovery. Anyway, so this is the last, Star Trek TV episode, and the producer was this cranky guy, and he was like, if there's a flight suit that fits him, we'll get him on. So we hung out for probably 10 hours on the Paramount Studios set. There were people picketing because they were mad that Star Trek was ending. And finally they got us on for like 2 or 3 seconds. And I just stood there flipping switches and looked at the camera. But that was my moment of fame. I was on an actual Star Trek show.
And you played you.
And I played me, right? Well, I think there's some credit, Lieutenant Virts or something.
You're an ensign.
Pretty awesome. Or ensign, yeah, that's right. They use Navy. That's right. So I was an ensign Virts. I forgot about that. So they, for years, when you Googled my name, that's what came up. It wasn't the fact that I was an astronaut or the fact that I was a fighter pilot or test pilot. It was the fact that I was on a Star Trek episode for 2 seconds. So it was pretty fun. So, and then years later, they did this, when the movies came out, they did this DVD anthology of all the Star Trek movies. And I helped them make the bonus content. So we did like real world at NASA bonus content for the Star Trek bonus DVD. And so and then I was filming this great white shark movie off the coast of Mexico. And Gene Roddenberry's son, was one of the passengers on the boat. So I have all these crazy connections with Star Trek that as a kid, I just liked it. I watched it. I had little Star Trek action figures. I never thought I would have all of these crazy connections, do the tribute to Mr. Spock from space on the day he died. There's a really cool story behind that picture too. If you look in the background, it's Cape Cod in Boston, and Leonard Nimoy is from Boston. And I had no idea. When I did it all, I was looking at my hand trying to get it in focus. I had no idea where on earth we were. And it just happened to be, that was a divine moment, that was a very appropriate tribute for Leonard. And, our expression in the F-16 was, I'd rather be lucky than good. And that was definitely a case of being lucky rather than good.
So you did a bit of acting, writing, pilot, astronaut, filmmaking. You mentioned One More Orbit, but you forgot to mention that it involves going around the world in a plane.
Right.
Is there anything that sort of pushes you to try new stuff all the time, or you just happen to like everything cool?
Well, as a kid, I loved photography. My parents got me a little SLR, the Konica SLR. You had to put the film in and wind it manually, and so I had to teach myself focus, and exposure, and all that stuff. And I've always had a camera around my neck until now. Now I just have, the iPhone. But I do have cameras at home, but I got the iPhone a lot more often than I do the other cameras. So that's just been part of me. And when I got to film the IMAX movie, and I got to be really close with Tony Myers and James Nyhouse, who was our director of photography. When I got a chance to do One More Orbit, I asked James to be my director of photography for this film also, because he's such a pro. So I don't know. I knew that's what I wanted to do, and I could see I want to make an impact in the world, and there's different ways to do that. And you can go just have a traditional aerospace executive job, and I didn't want to do that. You can go into politics, and in American politics, your job is to attack the other guys. That's the only thing they do, and I didn't want to do that. I didn't think it would be very beneficial to anybody. So I figured storytelling, writing, and film would be the best way to do it. So the big leap, though, I've done nonfiction, but I haven't done what you've done. That's a big leap into fiction. So I would like to do that at some point, but I'll need to get some more. You were giving me advice before we started here, so that's a big step, I think.
Well, that's something I would very much like to read, because I really like your style. So I'd be very interested. Publishing.
I've got several. I've got several that I've started. I'll write a couple pages and then I'm busy because I got all these other projects going on. And once I get my kids' book finished, maybe I'll sit down and make that my full-time, as full-time as I can be, because I'm ADD and I can't sit still for long on one thing. But
sometimes it's good not to just pine at the same thing for hours on end. You could be way more productive doing it for 2 hours at a time. And yeah, so I find that forcing it, for me anyway, doesn't really work. So I have a question.
So my experience. Well, yeah. We'll get
go ahead.
My experience in writing. So View from Above, the publisher's like, well, it's a 2-year process between signing on the dots for the contract and when the book comes out. And I had just left NASA, so I sat down. I set my alarm 8 a.m. I was at my computer typing, and by lunchtime I was done. My brain was done, and I wrote a chapter every morning. And after 2 weeks, the book was done. So I emailed it to them, and they were like, they were blown away. So the book publication date moved up a year, but that's the way I write. I just have to sit down. The hard thing is turning that stupid phone off. Which is what needs to happen. And you have to turn your email app off on your laptop and messages off on you have to just, disconnect. And then if I can focus, for How to Astronaut, I was traveling a lot. The last couple of years I've been doing a lot of speaking. That's my job. Doing business talks at businesses and stuff like that. So I wrote a lot of the book on airplanes, because you got a couple hours, you're sitting there. And the chapters I wrote are short, so I would just write a chapter per flight on my airline. I bet you half the book or more was written on United Airlines.
I was surprised that it's there's a lot of current events. I mean, there's mention of the pandemic in your book, and it doesn't make sense to me, because the fastest I've had one of my books come out is at least a year and a half after I finished writing it.
Right.
So I was very impressed.
The publisher, I had turned in my final manuscript, and when COVID hit, then I wrote a short book about comparing getting stuck. I was stuck in space for a month. We didn't know when we were coming back, low on supplies because our cargo ships were blowing up. There's a chapter in the book about that. So I was comparing that experience with being stuck on Earth, and I wrote a short book, and maybe an audio book, maybe it'll be a book. Maybe I think it's going to come out in a video series, but the publisher said, hey, can you do something about isolation? And so after it was already, the final thing was in, we added that chapter, which apparently you can do that. I didn't know you could, but apparently you can. And then space tourism too, that was kind of a last minute add-on, because Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic are flying space tourists, and hopefully probably next year. And so they asked me to do that. So there were 2 add-on chapters.
I have a bunch of questions, but I have one from my son Theo. He's 10, and he may or may not be watching us. He wants to know, what physical sensations are the most peculiar in space or weightlessness? And connected to that, what's the one thing in your daily life that feels super strange in space?
Wow, that's a good question for a 10-year-old. That's impressive. So I was in space for a few days, and one of my crewmates floating around, getting used to it. So a couple week learning curve before you get really good at floating. And my crewmate said, "Hey, come here, Terry, tap your foot on the floor." I was like, "What are you talking about?" Because you don't ever walk with your feet. Your feet never touch. They just float. They carry things, but you don't walk with them. So I tapped my foot, like boom, boom, boom on the floor, and electric shock shot through my body. It was like I stuck my finger in a socket, and I was like, "Oh my God, what just happened?" And he kind of laughed, said, "Yeah, isn't that weird?" And I'd been an astronaut for 10 years. I'd never heard this before. I read all the books, but apparently you stretch, right? You grow when you're in space, and apparently your nerves and your muscles grow at different rates, and different people are different, but I definitely felt it, to say the least. And so in my chest too, my upper body, it felt like I'd ripped a muscle bench pressing, but that was a really weird sensation, to say the least.
Now one for me. Well, I am basically jealous of your entire existence, but one of the things I'm most jealous about is you went to Baikonur,
Yeah.
where Sputnik took off, where Gagarin took off from. Not only that, but the rocket you took off on, at least the bottom half of it, is more or less the same rocket that lifted Sputnik and Gagarin up there. How was the whole thing?
Yeah.
Russia,
And,
the
right.
rocket.
And at Baikonur, they have a lot of different launch pads. It was the Soviet launch complex. And one is under construction, and they're working on this one. But the year I launched, we got to launch from the same launch pad that Yuri Gagarin launched from. So I was really, really lucky. And then I launched from 39A at the Kennedy Space Center, which was the same one that Apollo 11 launched from. So and it's also the name of my production company. I started a production company, 39A Productions.
Nice.
So anyway, flying with the Russians was really cool. It's so historic. They have all these buildings there that were the same ones that, the first human left Earth from there. And it was a real honor. You feel like you're going back in time. And in Baikonur, you're going to the Soviet Union. I mean, time has frozen there in many ways. There are some parts of it that are ultra modern, and most of it is 1960s Soviet Union. It's not really Kazakhstan. It's really Soviet Union. Apartment buildings are the same. There's a really funny Soviet film called Ironia Sudbe, or the Irony of Fate, and it's like the Soviet Christmas Story. Or Charlie Brown Christmas or whatever. It's the movie they all watch on New Year's, and it basically is making fun of the Soviet Union because their apartment buildings are the same everywhere, and Baikonur is like that. It's like, the same thing. So being a part of history there is really cool. As you said, the Soyuz rocket was really, all those early Soviet rockets were based on the same technology. And basically in Russia, if something works, it is never changed. It worked, they use it forever. I would take Russian class as part of my astronaut training, and we would watch old movies. We were watching this old Soviet movie. I forgot what it was called. But they're in this desert. It was like a silly kind of comedy movie, and they're in the desert, and it's probably Kazakhstan. And the manager, has a fan on because it's hot, and it's this little electronic. It's about the size of a Coke can with these little funny-looking elliptical blades that spin. And it was the same exact fan that we have on the space station and in the Soyuz. Like, these fans made it everywhere, including into space in the Soviet Union. So it was really cool being part of that history. And Star City is their Johnson Space Center. That's where all the cosmonauts live. That's where all the training took place. It's right near Moscow. Korolev is their mission control center. That's instead of Houston, that's Moscow. So I got a chance to be a part of all that. It was really cool.
Is there stuff for like a regular guy like me down there?
Absolutely. Well, you can go, the Russians have space tourism programs where you can go do training, for a fee, you can do anything. I mean, they've flown, the first space tourists were on the Russian Soyuz to the space station. I mean, there were guys who went to this, they paid whatever they paid, and they spent a week or 2 weeks in space. So, you can do MiG-25 ride. You go up to 50,000 feet, go Mach 2. They have a 0G airplane. There's a company called 0G in America where you get on an airliner, it goes up, pushes over, you get 20 seconds of weightlessness, which is really cool. So you can do all those experiences in Russia. I think Space Adventures is the company, but you can go to Baikonur on a curated trip. You can't buy a Aeroflot ticket or United Airlines ticket. You have to go with one of their special trips because it is a military city. You can't just fly to Baikonur. But you can pay buy a ticket there and go, see a launch, and it's pretty cool stuff.
I want to go. One of my favorite chapters in How to Astronaut is about survival training in Alaska. I found it very human and I don't know, genuine and touching, but it also, bears. It made me realize that being an astronaut is sort of like being an Olympic athlete. You train for God knows how long and then perform for a very short period of time. In your case, a longer period of time, but for some people it was 2 days or Well, is it worth it? Like that whole period before, those 10 years of training on their own, are they worth it?
It's really a lifetime of training. And of course, it was my dream. All I wanted was to fly in space. And I got to live in space for 7 months, which is amazing. And now I make a career, sharing those stories with folks, which is really lucky. It's opened up amazing doors for me and for my family too. But there's a pretty severe cost also. I was talking with a neighbor who's one of my astronaut classmates last week. We were talking about this, and another fellow astronaut was talking about it, and he said, on the balance, if you added up all the pros and cons, NASA was a net negative, which is wild. But I can understand where he's coming from because like I said, there are personal costs. Sometimes crews don't come back from their missions, and there's a lot of stress on your family and stuff. So it's not what the public sees. It's all glory, and astronauts are in their blue suits or their white spacesuits, and that stuff is amazing. It's so cool. But there's a human side to it too. Hopefully some of that comes out in the book. Again, it's not like a negative book, but I tried to be honest. I try to be as honest as possible because you don't usually get that.
Some of it is very honest. It's surprisingly honest at times.
Yeah. How do you go to the bathroom in Space Chapter?
Yeah, no, I was thinking more of about politics and things like that. Well, while we're on the subject, I was reading about the Gateway project recently. Canada, as always, is contributing an arm. We're making the Canadarm3 for it. And from the book, I got the impression that you were a big fan of the project. Why is that?
So I've written about it. You can Google Terry Virts Gateway, and you can read my op-eds about it. I was invited to speak at the White House 2 years ago at the National Space Council, and I told Vice President Pence that it was a really bad idea and that we shouldn't be doing it. And I was really proud of the White House. They invited me to speak on this, and they knew that I really strongly disagreed with NASA's position on that issue, and they still invited me back. And I said, hey, I'm going to say this, and they said, okay, we want to hear dissenting. I was really impressed. You don't normally get that in government bureaucracy, but the person that's in charge of the National Space Council asked me, even though I didn't agree with it. The reason I don't agree with it is it's a self-looking ice cream cone. The reason we're doing Gateway is because we have SLS and we have Orion and we have partners and we need something to do. And so it's just a way for everybody to have something to do. It's going to make getting to the moon much more expensive and time consuming. If we could just build Gateway and then get rid of it, it wouldn't be as bad. But unfortunately, once we get it, we're actually going to have to use it. So it's like a giant money sink that's going to last forever. And if we end up doing it, I'm pretty sure we won't, but it's hard to say. But if we did it, because what the Gateway is, some people call it ISS 2.0. There was a lot of frustration at NASA because all that the Johnson Space Center had come up with was ISS 2.0. but it's really ISS 0.5 because it's a lot smaller and less capable than the space station. It's just an orbit around the moon. So what they're saying is, before we go to the moon, we're going to build the space station there, and then we'll go to the space station, and then we'll go to the moon. But the problem is, you have to bring a lot more rocket fuel because you got to go. It's like if you're driving from Montreal to Toronto, but you got to stop in Pittsburgh on the way. Like, you can do that. It's just out of your way. And you got to go, you got to show your passport, and you got to buy more gas, and you got to spend another night in a hotel because it's going to take you longer. So it's going to take longer to get to the moon. It's going to make everything that we do more expensive. We're going to have to pay to build it, and then we're going to have to pay to operate it. And then it's going to make our flights to the moon less capable. And oh, by the way, people are going to have to spend more time in a really bad radiation environment. That's like the worst possible place for humans because the radiation is at its worst. At least on the moon itself blocks half of the radiation coming in. The other half is really bad. But when you're in Gateway, you're in deep space, you're not protected by the Earth's magnetic field. And so, unfortunately, one of the problems with being on the inside is, inside, you never want to meet your Hollywood hero. You just want to watch the movie and go, man, that's awesome, right? You never want to know all the details. So I know the person who invented Gateway. It was right after I got back from my mission. I was talking to him and I said, well, we're building Orion, we're building SLS. They don't have anything to do. What are we doing? And he said, well, funny you should ask. Headquarters just called and asked me to come up with something. And his office was full of all these charts. And it was Gateway. He's like, if we do this, it'll give Canada something to do. It'll give Europe something to do. It'll give Japan, everybody will have something to do. And it'll give SLS a mission. And headquarters needs something for Orion to do because right now we don't have anything. So that's not the reason. And there's other things we could be doing that are really cool, like going to the moon. And I think that's what Jim Bridenstine wants to do. And I think he's trying to do a really good job. But there's a powerful bureaucratic inertia that's hard to overcome. When I gave that talk at the White House, I had about 100 guys come up to me and thank me in secret, like whispering, "Thank you, Terry. Finally, something called the baby ugly," because no one in the universe is able to speak up against it because their company has a piece of the contract that is going to, provide them with funding for 5 or 10 years, and so no one can speak out against it. And luckily, I'm unemployed, so I can speak out against it.
And speaking of the space station, it's not as interesting, but I'm assuming at some point we'll need to either get rid of it or rebuild it or make another one, a better one, smaller one, bigger one. It won't. How long will it last? Well,
it's funny you should say. So for the last year, there's been this really small leak. The engineers noticed that more air is leaving than should be. Every time you do a spacewalk, you lose a little bit of air because you open up the hatch and close it. Every time a cargo ship comes and opens, you lose a little bit of air because you open the hatch. But we were losing a little bit more than that. And they finally figured out it was in the service module, or Zvezda, which is a big Russian it's the most important Russian module. The space station can't exist without it. It's really a critical module. And it's a copy of a Mir, it's a Russian Soviet 1970s design module. So they have to figure out where it is in there, and hopefully they can patch it. But that's just one example of, the station's over 20 years old. Zvezda launched over 20 years ago. So it's lasted a long time. They did a pretty involved technical review to see how long it's going to last. And it came out pretty favorable. NASA realized that the station could probably last for a long time. But it only takes one piece of micrometeorite debris to poke a hole in it. And all of a sudden, you're in a different situation. So hopefully, knock on wood, it's going to last for a long time. But it's not going to last forever. So obviously we're going to have something else to do in space.
And I see on the chat screen that there are a lot of Canadians watching us tonight. And let me say, Canada is awesome. And the space station wouldn't exist without the Canadian arm on the shuttle and on the station. I used both to help build it. And it couldn't continue to survive because the cargo ships come up, fly in formation, and the Canadian arm grabs it and attaches it to the station. So that's what I was getting at, actually, because I learned reading How to Astronaut that the Japanese module and the Russian modules also have little robotic arms. Tell us ours is better.
Well, yours is definitely bigger. The Canadarm 2 is huge. And it's what built the station. When I was there and we got extended for a month, we grabbed one module and relocated it. It was something that had to be done with the big arm. And then every time one of these SpaceX or Orbital Cygnus cargo ships comes up, it grabs it and attaches it. So without the arm, these things couldn't dock. And so it's Canada, the station doesn't exist without Canada. So, oh, Canada.
I grew up with the arm. When I was a kid, we'd watch TV and they'd make, the arm just being present was news. So we'd watch TV and they'd say, and we have liftoff of shuttle Endeavour with the Canadian arm on board. Couldn't do anything.
It's on your money, right? It's on the loon or something.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't have Canadian arm money.
It's on some. No one uses money anymore, but look on the Canadian, the loonie or the toonie or the 5 or something like that. It's on some of those. We're
running out of time slowly, and I forgot to take audience questions. So why don't we do that now? I clicked on the button.
We'll do lightning round. I'll do them fast.
We have a question from, I can't see, I think it's Cecilia. She says, Tova, age 8, wants to know if you saw Saturn and what it looks like from space.
Yes. So from space, you can see all the planets from Mercury to Saturn. Beyond that, they're too dim. The constellations are not visible because there's so many billions of stars. It was funny. I was doing an event with Chris Hadfield, and it was with Brian Cox in London. And Chris said, you can't see anything at night because the light's on and your eyes are dim. And I was like, Chris, turn the lights off and then get your eyes adjusted, because you could see like billions of stars. I could never pick out a constellation. Saturn is bright, it's yellow. Jupiter is really bright, it's orange. And Venus is the brightest, and it's basically white, a little bit of yellow. The planet that was really interesting was Mercury. And I think very few humans ever see Mercury. Or if you do, you don't know you're looking at it. It's always right next to the sun. So if you've got buildings or trees, you can't see it. But sometime go out and look for Mercury. It's really cool. In space, I saw it a lot, and I was kind of fascinated that I was seeing Mercury, which is pretty cool.
Right now, the night sky is super fun. You have Saturn and Jupiter right next to each other, and Mars is super bright. And
yep, Mars is next to the moon tonight. Yeah, it's been a really cool summer for the planets.
How long were you in space for?
My first flight was 2 weeks, and my second flight was 200 days, so a little over 7 months total.
That's a lot. Can you tell us about a scene? It's a question from the names are super tiny. I think it's Denise. Can you tell us about a scene that didn't make it into the new One More Orbit movie? Counting down until Tuesday the 6th.
A scene that did not make it into the One More Orbit movie.
Yeah.
There was a few scenes. So One More Orbit was done with a crew of pilots who are still flying with Qatar Airways. So we had to make sure that, it was exciting, because there were some really iffy flying over Antarctica all the way across the continent in the middle of the winter was sporty, to say the least. But we kind of had to make sure it was, we were safe and everything was in control. So that was my challenge. It wasn't one scene. It was like a lot of scenes that I had to make sure that I was making something dramatic. You don't just want to watch 8 people sitting in a business jet for 48 hours. That's not a movie. So I had to come up with those things. The scenes, actually, there was a couple scenes with a lady in Mauritius. That was the Apollo 11 newscaster in Mauritius. We found her kind of by accident. It was an amazing story. And then there was another guy in Punta Arenas, Chile. We had to stop in these places for gas. That was supposed to be like the fixer. And he was amazing. He was this great interview. So my local crew there, these photographers were the best. I mean, really great guys. Well, the one guy was the vice president of the ASC, which is like the top cinematographer in the world. And so they just found these local stories that I hadn't planned it. When they said you want to make a movie, I was nervous. Like, how do you make a story out of this? But because I had such great people on my team, there's a great leadership lesson. Hire great people and let them do their job. Don't tell them what to do. Let them do their thing. And that's what made One More Orbit the story it was.
We have 2 questions left and about a minute to answer them. So, did you ever see anything random, fun, weird, ridiculously awesome when you were up there? Natural phenomena, giant robot appendages?
Nothing I can tell you about on this conversation. I'm just kidding.
Finally,
the Aurora. I'll tell you, the Aurora. The Aurora are unbelievable. They're so spectacularly beautiful. I've never seen them from Earth. I saw them one time flying over Greenland in an airline, and it's like, oh, that's cool, way over there. But from space, it's like this alien thing. Next question.
Can you expand on NASA is a net negative? Can you expand in less than 20 seconds?
Well, like I said, there's, the flying in space is amazing, and the personal cost is real, so for different folks, it's a different calculus, just like anything. Is winning an Olympic gold medal great? It's great in some ways. The pain you had to put into it. For Wayne Gretzky as being the world's best hockey player, great. It's great, except for the man can't go to the grocery store. He can't go to Tim Hortons, so there's pluses and minuses about different things. And I'm just gonna, the pluses were awesome, and the minuses were what they were, and you just move on with life and move on to the next thing.
And we got a last one while I was talking, and I'll actually add to that question so we can finish on this. The question was, what did you learn about Earth while being in space? And I just want to tie into something that towards the end of How to Astronaut that I found sort of, I don't know, it made me think a lot. You said that you were looking at the Earth, and in some places there were lots of lights, and in some places there weren't any. And you came to a realization, and I don't know. Why don't we end with this?
So there's the environment. 99% of Earth is a beautiful planet, but you can see, smog over China. It's brown, and even India is pretty smoggy. And you can see deforestation, which is tragic in Madagascar and Brazil. So there's some things that we need to fix with the environment. And there's no plan B. There's only plan A. There is no other planet that we're going to move to. So we got to take care of Earth. And then the other one is the wealth. I thought I was seeing population. During the daytime, you really can't see people. But at nighttime, you see city lights. And what I realized was I wasn't seeing population. I was seeing wealth. And, most of the Earth, the 20th century was amazing because of democracies and because of free market economies. The human condition improved dramatically over the last 5 or 6 decades. Much less people living in extreme poverty. Literacy is better. Women are doing better all around the world. People's lives are much better than they were, 60 years ago. But that's not true everywhere, especially in Africa. There's just a big, giant black hole in the middle of the continent where there's very, very few city lights, which means there's not a lot of wealth. And so I was shocked to think I could see how people live on Earth. The most extreme example is North and South Korea. South Korea is this bright, vibrant, amazing place, and North Korea is this black hole of darkness. Some people live in the light and some people live in the dark. North and South Korea, definitely, you can see that from space.
Well, I think that's all the time we have. I could go on for hours doing this, but the people at Vroman's are going to kick us out. I want to thank you so much for doing this. It was a great pleasure for me. I hope people at home really enjoyed this as much as I did. I want to thank all the folks at home, too, for joining us tonight on a Friday evening. And thank you again to Vroman's for having us.
Yeah, thank you to Vroman. Support them if you want to get the book. Order it from them, and if not them, then from your local booksellers, because it's tough being a local bookseller nowadays, especially with COVID. So, and this is, if you're going to buy the book, it's a great Christmas present, and a local bookstore would be a great place to buy it from.
Yes. Yeah. And just a reminder, if you want to purchase the book, you can go ahead and click that green button somewhere down here. But with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Terry, Sylvain, thank you both so much. You were incredible. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And with that all said, I hope you all have a good night. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. This is